Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host, and we're here at Podcast UFO. And thank you for joining us this evening. We have a great show for you. We have, first of all, we have PJ Hughes. He's going to be coming up in about 40 minutes. He was at a different location. He's running home right now to get to his microphone and set up over there. Then we have Omar Lara, and he is a witness to the tic-tac UFO on the Nimitz. He'll be joining us. And Dave Beaty. Dave Beaty is a filmmaker, and my book made the very best film out there called the USS Nimitz Encounters on YouTube. It's over, I think it's somewhere around 1.5 million views so far on that, and it's a great film. He, because of his efforts in this film, he's having he's getting contacted by witnesses, and therefore is the show this evening. We're going to be talking about that. More coming forward. This is really turning into something. A few listeners say, well, you know, you're doing this Nimitz stuff a little too much, but I think it's a very important case, and I'm glad to be doing this, and hopefully every show that I've done about it, the listener gets something out of it, and I think that's going to be the case tonight. I'm pretty sure it is. And I have Alejandro Rojas coming up in just a minute with the UFO updates. I do want to thank everyone that supports the show. It's an expensive show to do, and I do appreciate everyone that helps out on that. Let me just make sure that we had some trouble last time. I'm going to ask this to the chat if the audio is okay. Hang on just a second. That was on YouTube last time. So I think we have everything ironed out, but I just want to make sure. And again, without your support, I couldn't do it. Anyone can support the show. You go over to podcastufo.com, and the information's there. Also, if you check out that website, you will see we have a new blog every week. And this week is very interesting. It's basically about journalism and UFOs, and the name of that blog, our blogger, I should say, is Charles Lear. He's doing a great job. He's down in New York, and the title of this is "How Do You Capture a Moving Target?" I like that because, as you know, UFOs are evasive, are unrepeatable, and except for a few cases, you never, get another chance once one goes by you. So anyway, it's a great blog. Check it out. Again, we have new blogs every week. You can also join our Facebook page. We have about 23,000 people liked on that, and there's Peggy helps out with that. There's news every day on that. And we have Alejandro Rojas up now for UFO updates. Welcome to the show, Alejandro.
Hello, thank you very much.
Thank you. And there's, it's funny, right during the show last week, it was 6 minutes in the show, 6:06, that Politico article broke, went across the wire, and you text me about it. And I imagine that's what we're going to be talking about tonight a little bit.
That will be. I want to talk about one other thing real quick. It was a breaking piece of news from last night. And then we'll get into that because there's much more to that, especially that relates to your program and everything.
Yeah.
However, the late breaking news last week, I gotta sneeze here, is from George Knapp. Yet again, George Knapp really is the guy releasing the best information when it comes to ATIP. He's staying on top of it. As usual, he's digging. And he got this document. So there's been some people questioning that these FLIR videos from the F-18s came from the DOD. To be honest, I personally feel it's been kind of a silly argument because we have a lot of supporting information, including from a multitude of witnesses supporting that those FLIR documents or those FLIR videos were from the DOD. It was a question of who released them. Lou Elizondo's already told us, it was released through the DOD. The New York Times, I've spoken to Leslie Kane, confirms that, they had this document that showed the DOD released these videos, and they vetted that document to make sure that it was real. But none of them had released the document. So finally, George Knapp was able to get a copy and release this document so we can see it ourselves. Now, we don't have confirmation from the DOD that this is real, but we have confirmation from Elizondo. We have confirmation from Harry Reid, from New York Times. I mean, we have a lot of credible people substantiating that this is a real document. So it was the DOD that released these. We don't have details about why or who released them. I think Elizondo knows, it's just he's not at liberty to share that information yet. So that's a piece of late-breaking news. However, that's kind of small fries and mostly only of a concern for some of us geeks who are really looking at all the details. The bigger concern is the Navy, what you were referring to. During your show, you must have inspired them. It only took them 6 minutes of watching your show, and they said, you know what, we need to make some UFO guidelines. So the Navy did that. They said, we're going to release some guidelines related to UFOs, and we're going to take this seriously. In fact, we have a full statement, and they've kind of been stashed with this statement. I got this from a guy who worked with the government doing PR work. He's also got an interest in UFOs, and he was able to get this full statement from the Navy. The Politico published the majority of this statement, but not the full statement. And by the way, it was Politico that broke this news. But here's the full statement, and I think this is important because it gives you an idea of why they did this. There have been a number of reports of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft entering various military-controlled ranges and designated airspace in recent years. For safety and security concerns, the Navy and the U.S. Air Force take these reports very seriously and investigate each and every report. As part of this effort, the Navy is updating and formalizing the process by which reports of any such suspected incursions can be made to the cognizant authorities. A new message to the fleet that will detail the steps for reporting is in draft. In response to requests for information from congressional members and staff, Navy officials have provided a series of briefings by senior naval intelligence officials, as well as aviators who reported hazards to aviation safety. So they're saying, congressional briefings, these briefings are what influenced them. Also, the reports from the very people you're having on your show, witnesses who were in the Navy who reported, influenced them to come out and to talk about this. They outline it pretty clearly. I've been arguing, and I wrote a piece that you can see at the front page of openminds.tv saying, hey, this is also a direct result of the work of TTSA. Some people disputed that, but in that article from last night, Chris Mellon was a part of it, and Chris Mellon actually wrote to George Knapp a document saying, yes, To the Stars and our efforts were involved with all of this, and getting these briefings to happen, getting these witnesses in front of Congress and others. And so Chris Mellon also confirms, that Tom DeLonge had said this also, but, sometimes people think he's exaggerating. But no, certainly To the Stars and Tom DeLonge deserve a lot of credit, as well as the Navy witnesses who have been brave enough to come forward and share their stories.
Alejandro, what do you say to the skeptic, or I've had someone wrote me and they said that this has nothing at all to do with UFOs. It meant just, threatening, like from a hostile country or something like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who make claims like that, but I think that, it's like a lot of these claims. It's like the claim about the FLIR videos and where they came from, or this claim that even ATIP has nothing to do with UFOs. To me, they're silly. I mean, you need to justify what you're saying. And on our side, when we're saying like ATIP was part of is all UFOs, we have plenty of substantiated information to say that. We have credible information. We have the guy who started the program, who got the funding, Reed. We got the guy who ran the program. We have people who were hired to work on the program all telling us this. As far as when it comes to the Navy, I think if you read that statement, it's pretty silly to say otherwise. Now, people have to remember also a UFO is an unidentified flying object. That doesn't mean that it is alien in nature. Some skeptics have said that, but that's not the truth at all. If you hear any of these people, it's something that we haven't identified. We don't know what it is. It demonstrates, advanced characteristics that we don't have anything, or at least known, that can do those sorts of things. So there was a great article written by Tyler Rogaway about all of this, where he examines it, and he says what we have to take from this is two things: that this is real. these aircraft that are performing these incredible feats, they are real. This is really happening. We can't ignore it anymore. Now, it could be advanced aircraft, and it's a good step for mainstream to take, because now they have to examine that. Does it fit? Is there anything in our arsenal, or are there any technologies where a craft can go thousands of miles an hour, demonstrating technology that would take the power of several nuclear blasts, like the SCU report has estimated. So, next step, we got to look into that stuff. It's a UFO. It's unidentified. So it is something that we don't know what it is. So now this is about examining what it is. So certainly, all of this UFO information that's been coming out, the TTSA, all of this is supportive of this. So it is looking into unknowns.
The topic we're going to be speaking of tonight, one of the things I've heard a number of times by different people speculating, saying, it's probably secret, military, black ops, and which could fit for some of it, but not all of it. For one of the things in particular that I'm thinking about is not only the G forces and how it held together with these massive G forces, but also the no witnessing of any sonic booms. That's something that a lot of people don't think about or talk about. But when something is shooting off at, say, several thousand miles an hour, you'd always hear a sonic boom. And how does it defy that? That's another big, huge mystery right there.
No, those are all of the scientific questions. Is that when an object that has a mass is moving at a great speed, you're creating G-forces, you're creating stresses on the object. For instance, it doesn't take too many G-forces for an F-18 to start to fall apart. Something, I can't remember the numbers. I see you went over it, and I've written about it, but I can't remember it right now. I'm sure some of your witnesses would remember, or Dave Beaty might remember those numbers. But, it's something, let's say a dozen. It's somewhere around 7 or 8 or something like that. But the point is that what we're observing here are G-forces that go well beyond that. So we are looking at strains on materials that we don't have the sort of materials that can take those sort of strains, let alone propulsions that can move something at those speeds or move them in the way that these are exhibited. So those G-forces are really important. The strain on the material of whatever this is, it would be tremendous. Not only that, like you mentioned, of course, they would be creating sonic booms if they're going above the speed of sound, but we're not seeing that. They also would be expending large amount of energy. So, for instance, a rocket. Rockets are they're propelling an object, a large object, very quickly. And in order for us to do that, we have to have these controlled explosions, essentially. And you can see the results of this energy being emitted, but we see no results of any energy being emitted, except for, one can argue, the small heat that we're seeing coming from these objects, because these were infrared. They were heat, looking at the heat of the object. So you do see some heat, but a very small amount of heat, as opposed to the large amounts of heat that you would be seeing generated from these things. So, yeah, the scientific questions are really tough to tackle. And even taking that perspective that it is human-made, which is possible, the technology that would need to be applied, at least given what the SCU has looked at, would have to be extraordinary. These technologies would have to be extremely advanced. So, especially not to have sonic booms or some of these other things that we've talked about. So, yeah, you're right. That's what's so jaw-dropping. That is what's so mysterious about all of this.
Right. Well, looks like we're at about the end of our time. Did you have anything else you wanted to pop in there?
No, I think those are all the big stories. Of course, you can see them on the front page of openminds.tv. There's more and more coming out about this. But, I think what this does, this Navy news, it justifies what you've been doing. I mean, I think it's terribly important to talk to as many witnesses as possible. I haven't been doing that, but that's because people like you have been doing a great job at getting to these witnesses. And so I think it's really important what you're doing, and I think it's well worth the effort. This is something we've never had before. It's been decades since the the military has spoken to UFOs. And when they mentioned that the Air Force takes this seriously, we wouldn't have known, because for decades, the Air Force has been telling us we don't pay attention to UFOs since 1969, even though we have documentation to show otherwise. So, the military certainly created their own problem with this whole thing, where people are feeling that they're not taking this seriously, because that's what they've told us.
Yeah.
Now, thankfully, it looks like they are taking it more seriously.
Yeah. Thank goodness. All right, Alejandro. Thank you so much. As always.
Yep, my pleasure.
Great.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks.
Talk to you next week.
All right. See ya. Have a good show.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Our guests, well, we have 2 of them, 2 out of 3 right now. And PJ will be joining us later on. So keep that in mind. And right now we have Omar Lara, and we also have Dave Beaty. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
So let's see, one at a time here. Omar, can you first give a nutshell about your position during 2004 in the Navy, and your background real quickly, if you would?
Sure, no problem. In 2004, I was a aviation fuels second class, basically a petty officer second class rank. And on board the Nimitz, I was an aviation fuels technician. Basically, what I did was monitor the fuel system, do maintenance on board, and monitor the defueling and fueling of all embarked aircraft.
Okay. Omar, it's a shame you're on a Mac and everything. We just can't figure out how to get your camera going. So when you're talking, I'm going to pop over this picture of you in Navy uniform. That you were very young then, right? When was that taken?
I was probably about 23 at the time.
Yeah.
I'm 41 now.
Yeah. And Dave Beaty. Dave, why don't you give your background?
Yeah, sure. As you know, I'm a filmmaker, but my day job is video and teleproduction, which I've been involved in for over 20 years. Before that, I was a television journalist, spent the first 10 years of my career covering local news in New York and then down here in Florida. When I came down here in the 90s, I joined the local state section of MUFON, and I was a field investigator for several years. Didn't have too many big cases here, although my mom lived in Gulf Breeze while that whole Gulf Breeze thing was going on. I used to go up there and visit her. And I've always been interested in the topic. Probably the first video efforts that I did with ufology was in the last year. So the rest of my career has been doing documentaries and films and commercial production, not necessarily UFO video production, but that kind of changed last year.
And what inspired you to do that?
Well, it was, several of my friends had sent me links to the Stars announcement when they first pitched the whole group, and they got up on stage and they talked about, these former intelligence officers and, Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, workers. And then they began talking about these incidents that occurred involving U.S. Navy carrier strike groups and craft that sort of defied physics, and they couldn't really identify them. And I was very interested in that story. And I guess, that was like around October 2017 when that came out. So a bunch of us began researching and trying to find out more about that particular case. And it wasn't soon after that we tracked down the Fighter Sweep article that had been published in March of that year. So back in March of 2017, written by a former fighter pilot named Paco Chirichi. And in this article, he lays out in detail the entire incident. And it was kind of a trade magazine for fighter pilots and aviation enthusiasts, so not many people had heard about it. And up until that point, I think that was a story that was told around the bar, in fact, it's what they said in the name of it. There I was. That's like kind of like a fighter pilot story that they told, to their friends only. So he put it in print and he researched it diligently and checked facts. He told me he had the naval investigation document, which to my knowledge has still never come out. This was not an ATIP document, according to him. This was like a naval investigation document that was very similar to what we've later seen. And he used that to kind of set the stage, so to speak, and describe it. And when I first read that article, I mean, I saw it in video. As a video guy, I'm like, wow, this is making a really cool documentary. You know, I could picture it and got the gears going up here.
Yep.
You know, so that's how it started.
Yeah, and the film you created looks very high quality. And usually when you see a film like that, there's major funding and all that. Is this something you undertook all by yourself, or did you get some backing?
No, when I first started thinking about it, I realized that, it would be very difficult for me to get sponsorship for something like this. I didn't have anything lined up. And over the course of several months, especially after the New York Times article came out in December and it started getting more popular, I considered how I could do it on a shoestring budget, because I do have a skill set that allows me to not only do video editing, but I'm also a DP, a cinematographer. In my past, I studied electronic music, and I also do computer graphics. I'm not, that's not my full-time day job of doing CGI, but I know how to do it, and you can see it in the film. So pretty much using that skill set with other resources I've used and that I can pull from, I decided that I'll just work on this for fun, because I really wanted to see it myself.
Yeah. Oh, looks like the screen froze here for some reason. All right, Dave, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you are frozen in time. And so we may have to try to pull you back on Skype and see what happened there. Omar, while we're trying to get him, why don't you give kind of an overall about your job and leading up to the infamous day there, if you would.
Yes, sir, no problem. In 2004, it was the second to last night of the operations. And the reason why I remember that being the second to last night is all the jet aircraft and all the other aircraft had already disembarked, meaning that they had flown off back to their home base. A lot of times people tend to believe or think that the aircraft stay with the aircraft carrier when we pull into home port. They go back to their bases. And typically a night like that, it's going to be a long one. Usually the air department is clearing up the deck of gear, as well as the air wing. The air wing also has attached sailors to them, and they come on board literally just by walking on, and they meet the aircraft once they land there. And the air wing is using our elevator system to remove a lot of their gear down into the hangar bay. And it's a nice night. It's Pacific Ocean, southwest of San Diego. And as the air wing personnel are going up and down the elevator system, while L3, if I'm correct on that, I believe it was L3, was down into the hangar bay, one of the gentlemen had fallen off. And he went overboard, lit his strobe light, and the man overboard signal went on. And at that moment, what had happened is, usually at a man overboard, everyone has to report in so that your department and your immediate supervisors know that you're not the one over the side in the ocean. So I called in, all accounted for, and after that, things kind of come to a certain standstill when someone's man overboard. You don't really get back to what you're doing. And we went back on deck after I called in, and we could see the sailor. He had drifted out at sea. He got caught in a current. And I remember that night, the deck department having an issue or problem getting the rig boat off the aircraft carrier. And his strobe lights flashing, and I'm standing out there on the aft end of the ship, which is the back end of the aircraft carrier. And without any warning, this white luminescent object shoots down out from the sky, comes down like a shooting star. And when you see a shooting star, they tend to almost break up and disseminate. You know what I mean? They slow down and disseminate. But this thing just kept coming down at an angle, and it just stopped right in between the horizon and the calm ocean. It was a nice, clear night, so this thing stuck out like a sore thumb, and it was just white, bright object, and it sat there for about 8 to 15 seconds between behind the sailors. So I'm not saying it was directly above them or behind them, but it was still a distance from the sailor overboard.
Wow. Well, Omar, we are right at our break, so this is really pretty exciting, and we'll pick that up when we come back. So that's it for this segment. Hang in, everyone, on KGRA Radio, and we'll be right back. Stay in there, YouTube. We're going to be talking.
All right, we're clear. Martin Willis, and there's just about 4 minutes and 10 seconds in this break.
All right, thank you. All right, so we are still live on YouTube, everyone, on this break. The next break we won't be. But anyway, I think we got everyone here, don't we? PJ.
Yep, I'm here. I'm back.
PJ, I don't hear a microphone. Do you have one?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it does. It's where I'm getting it doesn't sound quite like a microphone.
Hold on.
Yep. Dave, what happened? Dave, I'm not hearing you.
I guess the internet dropped. I just had to reconnect.
Hope that doesn't happen again. Are you far away from you're on Wi-Fi, obviously. You're far away from the router? No. Okay. All right. So, PJ, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
I guess that's a microphone. You have what type? You have a microphone in?
I had a microphone in, but I just took it out because you couldn't hear me on it.
Oh no, I could hear you. It just didn't sound like a microphone. It almost sounds a little better now. So we're still live on YouTube. So why don't you introduce yourself, if you would?
Name's Patrick Hughes. I was an avionics technician with VAW 117, the Wallbangers. We were on board Nimitz during what Dave has called the Nimitz encounters. I never actually saw the tic-tac myself. I speak for Roger, who was one of the in-flight techs who was airborne during Fravors intercept. He saw the tic-tac. He can't come forward because he has signed an NDA and has security clearance concerns, but he has confirmed quite a few things with me. He did see the tic-tac. It did form up with the Hawkeye during that flight. But more specifically, what I can speak for is after the Hawkeye, which was airborne during Fravors' intercept flight, came back, the Air Force came and confiscated a lot of the classified material off the airplane that records stuff during the flight, and that's where I come in, is speaking to some of the backstory of the actual situation.
Yeah. So we're going to be, when we go back live, we want everyone over at the radio station to be able to hear that too. So we'll kind of go over all that. But were you actually on the Hawkeye? I mean, did you fly in that?
Not in this case, but I have flown in it plenty of times, yes.
Yeah. That's quite. Can you describe what that is exactly? I mean, it's got this major radar dish on the top of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Hawkeye is essentially, it's an airborne early warning and control aircraft. It's frequently called the quarterback of the air group.
Huh.
Almost nothing happens in the battle group without a Hawkeye present, a Hawkeye airborne, and a Hawkeye controlling things. The radar and the cooperative engagement capability were two of the big assets. Links up the battle group, allows everybody to see the same picture.
And is it because it being up in the sky, like up in the air like that, is that it gets more of an overview than you could on the ground, like off a ship? Is that
the radar in general is a limitation is line of sight. You can only relatively see to the horizon. You can't. The higher up you are, the further you can see. Just like if you, with your own eyes, stood below a tower and looked, you're only going to see so far. You climb up to the top of that tower and look, you're going to see that much further.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah,
it's the same principle.
All right, I think we're going back, aren't we, Race? Race, are you there?
Yes, I am, and we're ready to go back.
We're ready here. Yep.
Super awesome. We are them. Bumper music rolling.
All righty.
All right, here we go. I'm going to count you down, Martin.
Yep.
In 5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, everyone, welcome back. I'm here with everybody's here now. PJ Hughes, Patrick Hughes is joining us, and Omar is here as well, and Dave Beaty. And so quickly, I know you've been talking on YouTube, but just introduce yourself if you would, Patrick.
Yeah, my name is Patrick Hughes. I was an avionics technician on board Nimitz. I worked with the Wallbangers, VAW 117. I'm speaking for both myself, who I can speak for some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. I didn't actually see the tic-tac with my own eyes. But I'm also speaking for Roger, who is one of the in-flight techs, who not only was airborne during Fravors Intercept, but who also saw the tic-tac form up with our Hawkeye during that same time frame.
Now, this has been kind of a mystery to me, and I don't know if, Omar, if you want to chime in on this too, but how come some people were made to sign the NDA and some not? It's a puzzle.
My honest opinion has to do with the CEC system and what it was capable of seeing, what it was linked to, what it was tied to. The amount of people who actually had visible access to that is a lot less than who actually saw the object. So that's my assumption is the Hawkeye saw a lot of data. We would have seen data that not necessarily everybody else could see. That's the only reason I can think of they would have NDA'd the crew that was in the Hawkeye and not everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, David Fravor, was he? Obviously, he's talking about it. I don't think that he had to sign one. I don't remember hearing that discussed one way or the other.
But he also wouldn't have seen the CEC data.
That's true. He wouldn't have allowed
in CEC.
And so you think that the data is more, let's see, incredible than a visual sighting?
Because of, and I'm going to try and steer clear of tactics and capabilities of what the system can actually do.
Yeah.
But CEC is essentially a data link. It links the Hawkeye, which is the only airborne asset that has CEC. It links to Princeton, it links ground stations, and it links Nimitz, and some other stuff all together. And they see a giant instantaneous picture of everything that's happening. Not everybody has access to that. Other sensors feed into it, but not everybody can actually see what the CEC system has. And it's a game changer as far as what information that has. And the Princeton would have recorded it, and it does it automatically. The Hawkeye doesn't always record it, but I know it was recording because I always hit record before I got out of the airplane. And odds are the Nimitz, even though it was tied in, it probably wasn't recording because it wasn't a high priority for them.
I see. Okay, so Dave, can you kind of go over how this whole thing happened where, PJ and Omar and other witnesses, I'm sure you have said other witnesses have gotten in touch with you over this film, right? Your film.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you're talking to two of them right here tonight. Your audience is hearing their stories simply because they at some point saw my movie, and in that I had asked any military personnel that had witnessed not just this particular case, but any military case, if they wanted to talk about it, to get in touch with me, and that, I would respect their privacy and so on, and not use their name if they wanted to remain anonymous and so on, that I promised to do so. And I've kept that. I haven't, like, anybody that doesn't want to, like, have their name or even their story told, I haven't done that. But PJ reached out to me, I don't know when it was, back in November or so, telling me that the story that you just heard. And I think at that point I asked him if he had any other, friends that were there during that time. And, sure enough, like, several weeks later, his friend contacts me via email. And, just bear in mind that I did check these guys out as far as their military service records or their separation papers, their DD-214s. A lot of these strike groups have cruise books that every few years when they go on deployment, they create these, hundreds and 300-page yearbook, so to speak, that has photos of every single crewman and their rank and what department they're in. So you can also easily go back, and I just made sure that, the people that were contacting me, if they said that they did something, that I checked it out and verified that. And in some cases, I would have multiple people that were corroborating each other's stories. So these two gentlemen, told me their story. And then later on, actually, I think it was probably just in March, that Omar emailed me as well and told me the story about the man overboard and the kind of incredible nocturnal light that he witnessed towards the end of that workup.
Right.
And that's not all. I have like dozens and dozens of other sighting reports that have really nothing to do with the Nimitz. Some of the other witnesses that I've been working with came out individually that weren't necessarily related to my film, such as Kevin Day and Gary Voorhees. Those two sailors I became acquainted with outside of my film.
I see. Omar, right before we were going into break, you were telling us about your encounter. You saw this thing come down right down to the water and just stay there. I think you said something like 8 to 15 seconds, and you don't know. You said you didn't think it was right over the sailor that had gone overboard, but it was over in that direction, was it?
Yes, sir. It was. I would say it was directly behind him, and it was nowhere near the sailor that was overboard. His strobe light was still flashing, and between those 8 to 15 seconds, while the deck department was still struggling to remove the rig boat from the Nimitz, one of the sailors that were on that sponson with the rig boat literally turned the spotlight to try to illuminate this object. So there's a witness there as well. And as he turned to try to illuminate it, it lasted maybe 2 to 3 seconds after he did that, and it went back to the sailor. And then maybe a few seconds shortly after that, that's when the object took off at an incredible speed, just as fast as it came down. It went right and it went left, but at an angle, maybe at an acute angle or a 90-degree angle. And at that moment, it just shot right back up into space where it came from. And when I mean shot right back up, I don't mean as you would witness a space shuttle launch. You could still see exhaust fumes, and the space shuttle is traveling at an incredible speed, but you can still generally follow it with your eyesight. But with the movement of this object, you literally have to move your torso, and you have to look up just to keep up with this thing. And there was no sonic boom, no trail whatsoever, and it just took off as fast as anything I've ever seen on this, faster than anything I've ever seen on this planet.
Now, did you see the actual shape of it looking like a tic-tac, like the other ones, or was this more like a round object? What did you see?
It was definitely roundish. Compared to the stars, I would say it was like maybe the size of a quarter. It was a nice clear night.
Mm-hmm.
So you could see it. I mean, even if it was, well, after the fact that you saw it shot down and it plant itself there, it was pretty visible compared to the night sky and the stars. But as far as Commander Fravor's description of the object, I didn't see anything. As far as, I wasn't as close to it as Commander was, and this thing just moved at incredible speed, and that's one of the things I'll never forget.
And Omar knows Commander Fravor, by the way. I think that he worked with him on Nimitz in his capacity, with the jets. So
I had encounters with Commander Fravor almost at a daily basis. If he was there in his office, I would turn in fuel reports. Basically, it's just a breakdown of how much fuel each aircraft, or actually each squadron, was using in pounds, not in gallons. And it's just like a general breakdown of how much gasoline or JP5 they're drinking, basically. And it was, a good morning, sir. How are you? And I have to be very respectful, and of course, respect his rank and stand-up individual, if I remember.
And do you think your encounter was approximately the same, dateline as when he had that encounter? Did he actually, was that a known thing when these encounters were happening?
Well, no, sir, not for me. I wasn't privy to PJ's account due to his security clearance. Just to piggyback on what he said during the break, my security clearance was nowhere near his, or as far as others in combat systems. I had no clue of all those other incidents that happened, and that was one of the first things that came to mind right away when I heard. I believe it was Jeremy Corbell. He came out with it first on a George Knapp interview, and I happened to be listening to that only the fact that it wasn't until 2016 that I had just got done reading Annie Jacobs' book of Area 51. She mentioned Mr. Knapp, and I got back into the UFO subject and just kind of started trying to figure out maybe what did I see, or maybe someone has insight into this object with this incredible maneuverability and technology. And when I heard Mr. Corbell mention it, I literally just jumped out of my seat at the middle of the night. I woke up my family, and there had only been maybe 5 people that I ever told in my lifetime since that incident. And that is when I reached out to Mr. Corbell. And then a few months later, I remember he had mentioned that he has Bob Lazar's video coming out, as well as Skin Rocker Ranch. And I think that just kind of took precedence over his work and his daily life. And then I saw Mr. Beaty's video, and I said, maybe I tell this gentleman my story, and hopefully we can get some other witnesses, because I was not the only one that saw this thing. I mean, there's a gentleman right next to me, and I won't release his name because he's still active, and out of respect to him, his service time, and his family, and close friendship, I won't say his name. He saw this object too. But no, sir, I mean, there was no information out there in regards to, hey, we're chasing these UFOs, nothing like that. But PJ, of course, they knew about it, but not me, because I had no security clearance like that.
But was this on the training? Was it on the same training session off of San Diego in 2004?
Yes.
It was the same time?
Yeah, same time.
Wow.
We did go out to sea twice in November. And I believe Mr. Beaty is researching the deck logs for that particular night.
Right. We have a FOIA request in right now for the Nimitz deck logs. The ones that were already produced didn't go up to the end of November. I believe, I think that they went up to like November 16th or something like that. And Omar related that he believed that this event might have been the last night before they went back to port. So that would have been later in November. So we did go back and resubmit to try to get the rest of those logs, specifically looking for that man overboard so we could correlate the date when this event happened, which I think is kind of an interesting thing. And the other thing I wanted to ask you, Omar, is because, you are on the ship, do you ever remember any sort of scuttlebutt that, they were playing the X-Files, or that there was any cartoons, or anything like that around that period? Do you recall?
I remember they kept playing that movie with Will Smith over and over, and then they even played Close Encounters of the Third Kind, I believe. That was I don't know if it was that one, but I do remember that Will Smith movie being played.
Men in Black.
Yes. No.
Oh, 4th of July or whatever. Independence Day.
Yeah.
Independence Day.
Day.
He was a jet fighter pilot.
Yeah, Independence Day.
That's all.
They were busting you a little bit there. Wow. So when this happened, first of all, I'm going to ask you, you said there was someone beside you, and I wondered if you had an approximate idea how many other people witnessed it. Do you talk among yourselves, and did you report anything?
Oh yes, we talked about it, and that's one of the experience. One of the things I take out of the experience. As soon as the object went back to wherever it came from, short time after that, we went into general quarters, and general quarters is basically battle stations. There's something within our vicinity, so. Not only the eyewitnesses in front of me, which probably were about, I'm going to say 5 to 8 or 10 people. I remember them standing there, and as well as the gentleman next to me. We went into general quarters, and at that time, they called for non-essential flight deck personnel to leave the flight deck. Basically, what's going to happen is we're going to launch, and we had the Alert 6 on standby. And the Alert 6 is a jet aircraft that's sitting on the catapult system while the catapult system is charged, ready to go. In the jet aircraft is a pilot, and he's going to get ready to shoot off and maybe chase this thing, but he wasn't going to catch that object. And shortly after they called for flight deck personnel to leave, before I could even don my cranial and put my goggles on, they called it off. So they didn't launch the jet aircraft. So I know that combat systems had to have seen this object, because I don't think they were going to do a man overboard drill. I'm sorry, a general quarters drill during the actual man overboard. I don't believe they would do so. So the general quarters went off, and like I said, they had to have seen something on our radar system.
Wow, interesting. Dave, I'm asking you this question because I know you researched this thing overall, and I just wondered, do you know if this is the only encounter that was seen from the ship or any of the ships themselves?
As far as I know, as far as being a separate incident from the November 14th incident. Now, there are other eyewitnesses to the tic-tac, and those would be Kevin Day and Gary Voorhees, who both independently, after those intercepts, went up to the bridge wing on the USS Princeton, which would be, way up high on the superstructure of the ship outside. They have tripod-mounted or rail-mounted binoculars that are called the ship's big eye that are used for the watchstanders. So they would sneak up there, get a bearing and range on one of the radar tracks that they had down in combat information, go back upstairs, and then look through these big eyes. And Gary Voorhees describes seeing these white objects at quite a distance. He didn't know specifically the distance, but he thought that they were probably, based on the radar tracks, that they were 20 to 30 miles out. And he could see the white tic-tac object at that distance. Kevin Day also reported a very similar experience, and I think that there were probably more than those two gentlemen went up to the bridge wing. In fact, Gary told me that some of the crew were kind of shooing these guys away because every spare chance they got after this, they were all running up there trying to get in line to see these things. So, and then the other, not as far as on the ship, but then, PJ has the description of his friend that saw the objects from the E2 Hawkeye. And again, that particular story has never been told. If you look in any of the official documents from To the Stars, from the ATIP, these people were never interviewed by any officials in that capacity. So when they're telling me that story, it's never been in the press. And in fact, you'll get people saying, no one from the Hawkeye squadron saw the tic-tac, because I read the report. It's not in there. But I'm saying, no, there's a witness here, and there's a corroborating witness that says that they did. Now, PJ and I have tried to reach out to some of the other flight crew that were there. So far, we've been unsuccessful, but there's 5 people in that airplane, and, if one person saw it, he says that the whole flight crew saw it. So there's probably some other witnesses out there in that airplane.
Now, I know it seems to me a plane like that probably doesn't have a lot of windows, so maybe over by a door or something like that. If
they all have their own window.
What's that?
They all have their own window.
Oh,
I know. I have a funny story about that.
Well, we got 2 minutes to break, and I just wanted to say when we do come back, I want PJ to tell basically his story thoroughly there. But go ahead.
Well, when I first heard that, I had somebody that's a pilot tell me no, they couldn't have seen it because there's no windows in the back of the Hawkeye. And then PJ sent me a photograph of the window in the Hawkeye in the back. There's 3 windows. And then the pilot told me, well, they never open the windows when they're flying. And then PJ explained that, well, yes, they do. They just have to put the radar in standby. So each time they came up with a reason, PJ, who's very knowledgeable of the Hawkeye, would show me a picture and say, well, here's the proof right here. So it's kind of interesting.
Wow. Yeah. I would just, I was just picturing, again, just picturing in my mind a plane like that I wouldn't think would have, windows accessible, because it's all instrument reading. That's what I would think. But let's see, we're going to be, why don't we head into break now since we're at this bridge here. We'll go into a break and then we'll come back and we'll continue. And when we do come back, I'll have PJ tell his story, basically. All right, everyone, so hang in there. We'll be right back right after this break. All right, welcome back. This is Martin Willis, and we have 3 guests tonight. We have Dave Beaty, we have Omar Lara, and PJ Hughes, or Patrick Hughes, and we are talking about the Nimitz, USS Nimitz UFO incident. Fascinating story, if you ask me, overall. And, I forgot where we were when we went to break. But I did say, what I do remember is that I wanted PJ to tell his story. And so, PJ, if you would, please do talk about what happened.
Sure. Just remind everybody, I do speak for 2 people. I speak for myself and I speak for Roger, who wants to remain anonymous. And you can thank Dave Beaty for the Roger moniker. We needed a way to talk about him without using his name. But like I said earlier, I'm a avionics mechanic. I fix the radar, the communications, navigation equipment, and all that on the Hawkeye. And we launch the airplanes, we recover the airplanes, and it's a routine cycle when we're out to sea. And usually when we launch an airplane, the same person's up there to catch the airplane, and we put all our classified material in the airplane when it launches. We take it all back out when we're done. We make sure nothing broke, nothing got lost. But on the particular day of Commander Fravor's intercept, when all the tic-tac stuff happened, I had launched a Hawkeye routine mission. Nothing special was going on. Nothing special was relayed to us during the flight. They normally radio back to the ship on the way back to let us know if there are any major problems. Nothing was said. The aircrew landed. They normally let us know if anything broke. Still nothing was said. The five guys in the airplane all took off downstairs together. I go in the airplane, check my stuff. I pull out my, we call them RMCs, we call them bricks. They're essentially hard drives that store data for the airplane and run some of the airplane systems. And these we don't leave in the airplane. They get stored in our safe. So I take these all out. I finish my stuff. I walk down to my shop on the ship. We store all this stuff in our safe, so we have to open the safe, put it all in, we sign it in, it's all tracked. Close the safe when we're done. Within a couple minutes. I still don't remember the exact time frame. But my commanding officer comes, knocks on our door, and it's weird for one because we're off in the middle of nowhere. My commanding officer rarely comes by our shop. Usually if he does, we were in trouble.
Yeah.
So when he shows up there, and we open the door, it's a very small workspace, very small hallway. He's got two guys in Air Force flight suits with him. They couldn't tell you what rank or any of that, but there's distinctive differences between a Navy flight suit and an Air Force flight suit. You can readily tell, who's who. Not to mention, who's on the ship, even when it's 5,000 people on an aircraft carrier. In your own world, which my world was the aviation side, you knew who was there. I might not have been able to tell half of who Omar's coworkers were, but I knew who was in the aviation side. And he basically says, I need the stuff off that flight. So we have to open up our safe. He actually had to wait a minute because it's a two-sided safe, needs two combinations, so I had to wait for the other half to come back. They had gone to the bathroom or get a drink or something, I don't quite remember. Pulls it out, he turns, hands it to the Air Force officers. I ask him, who am I signing it out to? Because we got to track this stuff. So he says, basically, sign it out to me, as in my commanding officer. And they took off, and that was the last I ever saw those hard drives. That's the last I ever saw those Air Force guys see.
Now, is this very unusual? Is that the only time this has ever happened?
The only time we ever usually mailed off those hard drives is if we were running basically tests for Raytheon, who was the company behind a lot of the software. So it was a rare occurrence that our commanding officer came and took anything of ours, let alone took that stuff. Because he's got guys subordinate to him who are in charge of all the classified materials. So if it was a normal routine thing, he would have sent his minions, so to speak, not himself, to come get it.
And you said this was by an Air Force officer, or I believe you said that accompanied your...
Yeah, he had, like I said, he had two guys in Air Force flight suits with him.
And so you can assume they jumped on board a chopper or something, and...
There's only two ways on board an aircraft carrier when you're out to sea. That's Hilo or C-2 Greyhound. I also worked on the Greyhound, so I know they didn't come on that, which means they came on a Hilo. But the problem with the Hilos is they pop in and out so often. It's they're landing in between every flight, every launch cycle, so it's hard to track who actually comes and goes on those. So who knows when they actually got there? But they weren't there earlier. I know that much.
So it's very interesting because obviously the data is being was researched or hidden, maybe became top secret or something. Who knows? But they definitely had enough to go on there to be concerned enough to take this type of action. And what else? Anything else happened following that?
Roger, who, like I said, was airborne during that flight and who saw the tic-tac with the crew, they came back, went straight down to the skiff, which is it's a secure, classified information facility. It's basically a room where you can't hear anything outside it. You can talk about what you need to. They went in, they were debriefed and signed NDAs. I don't know the extent of their debrief because Roger's not sharing that, and I don't blame him. He shared more than enough than he probably needs to. But they were debriefed, and Roger loved to fly. He was the only enlisted guy who routinely flew. So when he came back to the shop, you could tell he was not in the same type of mood he normally is. He was normally happy-go-lucky every time he got to flying. He was kind of in a serious mood, and he started to tell us what was going on, and this was well after they had taken our hard drives and everything. He came back and started to tell us what the flight happened, or what happened during his flight. You could tell he was kind of shaken, but our division chief happened to return at the same time and basically interrupted the conversation. He said, well, this is not something you're supposed to be talking about. Conversation ended, and that's really the last we ever spoke of it until after I saw Dave's video and reconnected with some people.
Can you, I know it's secondhand, but can you go over with what so-called Roger witnessed?
Yeah, that time of, training cycle, our radar was a lot less of a priority. They wanted CC stuff. They were training CC. They were testing CC. Everything was about CC at that period of time. So the radar, to my knowledge, was not operating. It was on, but it wasn't operating, which means those windows were open. Even if the windows in back were open, the cockpit's fully open. They have almost a 260-degree view out of that cockpit with how much they can see between the windows. So people would have seen stuff. But according to Roger, the tic-tac kind of formed up with them for 5-10 seconds, long enough for them to kind of get a good look at it, and then just peeled off and went about its business. And I was never aware of that from Roger at the time. Like I said, this didn't come until we had like a nice long conversation after the fact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Did they talk about speeds or anything at that time?
No. The problem with the Hawkeye at that amount of time is the radar was not that sophisticated anymore. It was starting to be at the end of its life, in my opinion. We could track the tic-tac, and the tic-tac was tracked by the Hawkeye, just not to the extent the Spy 1 tracked it. Basically, our radar moved too slow.
Right. Let's see. There was a question that I was going to ask you. We talked about during the break. Oh, yes. Here it is right here. Can you go into the detail about the radar blocking effect, if there was one, that the tic-tac seemed to demonstrate?
When it comes to jamming a radar, it's really, really hard. And about the only people I know who have the technology to do that is us. But the radar on the Hawkeye was not jammed. The radar on the Princeton wasn't jammed. Gary Voorhees, who was one of the techs on the Princeton, has spoken more than once of they thought their Spy 1 was having issues. They thought it was acting up. They actually took the system down to clean, reboot, and do all their stuff. So they were seeing what they were seeing, and they determined after they brought the system back online that they were getting accurate targets. There was no jamming.
I see. So the whole jamming idea came up just because it was so spectacular what they were seeing?
I've read in some of the official reports that I've seen that the Hawkeye, wasn't tracking it, and that's not true. It might not have constantly tracked it to the effect of the Spy 1, because there's a huge generation gap in the Spy 1 radar and the Apple 40-5 radar. But the Hawkeye tracked it. Yeah. They might have had to be guided to it. They might have had to get a little coaching from the Princeton, but the Hawkeye tracked it. That's the only thing I can think of why jamming was discussed at all.
Well, one of the jamming topics came up with one of the FA-18 pilots that I believe it was in the second flight. Commander Fravor mentioned on Fighter Pilot Podcast that Chad Underwood was the guy that filmed the at-FLIR video that we have. And I believe it was that flight that talked about it. And they said that there were no jamming cues. Champagne bubbles, I think they said that there were. And the weapons system officer said that he thought that the ASA radar on the F-18 just could not hack it. In other words, the object itself perhaps had a radar cross-section that made it very difficult to get a lock on it from that FA-18 onboard radar system, whereas the Spy 1 Bravo radar was much more sophisticated. So that it did come up, and I believe on ABC Nightline, Commander Fravor, in some of those initial interviews, did say that he thought that he witnessed some jamming indication on his radar system. So again, that would be a question for him.
Right. Dave, are you, since you're talking now, for working on this film, can you tell the listening audience some of the people that you worked with that assisted you with, the different aspects of your film regarding this case?
Sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Going back to the very beginning, I tried to reach out to everybody that I could. I did try to identify the flight crews that were there in the beginning and find out who was in each airplane. Of course, we know that, in some of those reports, the names are redacted and that those individuals did not want to come forward. I did find out that, the pilot of the second jet of Commander Fravor's flight was a woman who does not want her name to be used. In the backseat of that plane was Commander Jim Slate, who appeared in several media reports. So I did reach out. Several of those individuals helped me a little bit. It was kind of difficult to pull information from that side of it. When Senior Chief Kevin Day arrived in kind of my world where I could contact him, he was very open to helping me with questions that I had, because in doing a recreation, I wanted it to be as accurate as possible.
Yeah. And
that's not only, the position of the ships, where things were, the location, the radio calls, for instance. His assistance was invaluable, helping me to come up with, what the Princeton air controllers were saying to the pilots, what would have happened, because initially the Hawkeye would have had control of Fast Eagle. That's, how it works in those air training exercises. It's not the Princeton that's usually doing the controlling, it's the Hawkeye. But in this case, they took control, so they helped me there. There were other individuals that gave me assistance as far as the jets and the squadron IDs on the planes, all the way down to the the decals on the planes and so on. So quite a few people, and a lot of the witnesses, such as PJ, did help me when I had a question about what kind of data was confiscated. Why were they interested in this specific information? He could explain that. Again, none of these individuals ever, went past anything that was classified with me. In fact, they direct me to the internet, to a Navy site to describe, for instance, the CEC system. You can read a description on the U.S. Navy's website of what that system is. Even if it's a highly classified sensor, you can get an idea of what it does. And then other, data that was on those hard drives, for instance, what was it that these officials were coming to take? And he would explain to me what, the value of that data would be. So, yep, I did receive a lot of assistance.
That's good. Now, what about the UFO community? Has anyone actually reached out to you from the UFO community and helped you, or in any type of way?
Yeah. When I first started this, the first thing I did before I even started doing a film was I created a Facebook group. I was out there trying to seek individuals that had information that could point me in the right direction. And, some of the first people, like Dr. Bruce Maccabee, Rich Hoffman of the Scientific Coalition of Ufology, once they saw that I was asking, intelligent questions and using critical thinking, that I wasn't just jumping to a conclusion that these are ET spacecraft, that I was saying, what are these? This is very interesting. Then they sort of kind of helped me, and they would put me in touch with other individuals that were trying to do scientific, analytically based research on this material. So
that's great. That's great. I like to see that happen. Did Robert Powell and you ever have a conversation?
Yeah, we were sort of on parallel tracks. He was very involved in his research paper that he recently published along with the other researchers at SCU. During the last year and a half while he was conducting that research, I found that a lot of times we were kind of on parallel tracks as far as freedom of information requests and so on. I have to say, a lot of his stuff was really valuable. I would look at some of his blog posts and so on, and it kind of gave me ideas. And if I did get a document, I tried to share it with him, but usually he already had it. So we discovered, together. I mean, we discovered different things. I gave him the names of some of the witnesses if he wanted to interview them. He didn't really reveal too much. I think his investigations, he tries to keep everything, close to the vest, because that's just a technique he uses. But
yeah, I get that. So I'm opening up the lines. I don't know if I went over this with my guests, but I'm going to open up the phone lines, and a caller can call in and ask any one of our three guests separately, or just a general question. And that number's up on the screen in YouTube. If you're over at KGRA Radio, that number is 603-967-4030. This new Skype is driving me crazy because you're going in and out of this big, huge screen, and I have to keep changing things here. We're going to have a new system hopefully by next week, and Skype will be out, which I'm pretty happy about. So again, if anyone wants to call in, ask any one of our guests a question, the time is now. You can call in. The line is open. And let's see. So I'm wondering, as far as these people getting a hold of you, like both Omar and PJ, have you had anyone actually try to get in touch with you that was sort of hoaxing something? Have you had any of that experience?
No, sir. Not at all. Nothing.
That's good. Dave, have you had anyone contact you that didn't pan out?
Not that I can think of. I mean, well, to be honest, when you go outside of the Nimitz events, I did have people contact me with sort of remarkable stories that seemed unbelievable. But in the beginning, when somebody would tell me a story about a Navy vessel and an encounter, I would listen with an open mind, and then sometimes in the end you'd find out that is impossible what you're saying, even though I think you may even believe it yourself. So yeah, I did receive some communications from individuals that, I'm not sure why they were telling me things that were incorrect. But again, I think that does happen when you put yourself out there and you ask for people to come forward. Maybe it's delusional or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah, every now and then that'll happen. Sometimes I think some of the really bizarre sightings seem more truthful than the mundane ones. I mean, they're just some things that you hear about that are just so you can't even picture someone making these things up. I mean, some of them are just really incredible. Some of the ones that I've heard,
I got some amazing reports that in the future I want to tell people about, because some of these were multiple witness sightings from Coast Guard vessels and Navy vessels and so on that stretch back way before the Nimitz encounters, but they're still valuable historical cases that maybe have never been heard before.
We have a caller on the line. Caller, first, please mute your computer or listening device, please, caller.
Oh, I apologize about that. Yeah.
So anyone that calls on the show, make sure you mute your listening device, whether it's a computer or phone or whatever. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Adam from New York. How you doing?
Hi, Adam. How are you? And you have a question. We have 3 guests. You have a question to direct to anyone in particular?
I just wanted to put an overall statement and question. First of all, I really appreciate you guys coming out with this story. I was into it. I got back into this thing from the New York Times article in 2017, and I just want to ask you guys, being that this is an actual real phenomenon, real subject, what can we do to kind of get this information out more to the public? Because I kind of feel like it's almost all of our responsibility to make this a more credible subject, and I feel like I can't help but to feel like it's still, looked at in kind of a not a joke way at this point, but I've had a lot of conversations, and I just want to know what you guys think about what I can do or what we can do for our parts to spread the story so other people come out and make this a more credible subject. That's my question, basically.
Thank you,
Would
Dave.
that be okay if I answer that, Mr. Willis?
Yes, go right ahead, Omar.
Adam, you said your name was, sir?
Yes, sir.
If I would have known of the subculture of the UFOlogy the minute I got out of the service, I would have jumped on it and told someone this story. That was the thing. I did not know of any avenue to take. I didn't know of Mr. Beaty or shows just like this one with Mr. Willis and Alejandro or any of the thing. Like I said, it wasn't until I read that book by Annie Jacobs in 2016 that I knew of individuals named such as George Knapp, and then I started digging in and finding shows like this and reports of incidents such as mine. So I that's a good question. I really don't know. I don't think it's talked about as much as mainstream. It pops up and then it'll definitely go away just as fast as any other news story that pops up.
True. Dave,
go ahead. Yeah, one thing that I would say, and I know other people have been doing this, is when we do have news reports that come across our feed, for instance, the U.S. Navy's recent announcement that they would be implementing procedures and policies for service members to report these incidents. And that was reported in Politico and other, major news organizations. It's a very serious, discussion, and you can always share that. I mean, social media is so powerful these days that if you do share it, with the people say, take a look at this, and it's not. I mean, when it's coming from that source, I think it's more readily digestible than like a tabloid or something like that. And there's other ones. Last week, Tyler Rogoway, who's an aviation journalist, came out with a really interesting story on the U.S. Navy's policies, on his site called The Drive. So again, that's a very critical thinking, mainstream piece of information you can share with people. Other people have said, right. Even my video, they've shared with other people, because a lot of people don't even know about it, even though, in our kind of circle, we know all about it. And people say, oh, stop talking about the Nimitz. We're sick of hearing about it. But yeah, I mean, I think not everyone even, if you went out there and polled people, we're a very small percentage of people that have ever even heard of it. So
yeah. Well, I just want to let you guys know that I did share. I do incessantly. I did share the information. It was a lot. There was a Fox. They even did a thing. Tucker Carlson did it last week on the new Navy policies. I shared that, and I shared the Politico story and the Tyler Rogoway. I shared that, and I just want to let you guys know, man, that I'm doing my part as just a regular civilian putting the story out there. And I want to thank the men for their service to this country. I think it's just so important. So I hope there's more people like me out there trying to do this. I just think it's important. That's all. I just want to let you guys know I'm trying to get this story out there, and I hope just more regular people continue to do the same thing. And Martin, your show is great. I tune in every week for it. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the call.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. Bye.
Kind of along their lines, I've heard there's a saying that in the UFO, ufology eats its own. In other words, there's a lot of infighting and all that. But the one thing I would like to say to someone that's getting into this topic, new interest in it, is be aware of the hoaxing. That's the thing. I liken this to, I'm in the fine arts and antiques, and people collect, and when people collect and they get a fake, then they stop collecting. And it's kind of the same thing in ufology. If someone's interested in the UFO topic, and then they look at something and they, oh my God, look at this on YouTube, and it ends up being CGI, they say, oh God, I'm not going to bother with this anymore. That type of thing. And it could even happen with Chinese lanterns. Some people have could see a Chinese lantern and think it's a UFO and get all excited and then say, oh, geez, there's nothing to this. So, it's
well, yeah, right. I mean, isn't the statistics that less than 5% of all unknown sightings turn out to be explainable? So even though people see something and videotape it with their phone, 95% of the time it's going to be explainable. And I think that can be discouraging for people when they keep seeing that. But it's that small percentage that's just remarkable unknown mystery.
Right.
But very real,
Just to jump in on what you had said, Mr. Willis, I think you're correct, because after my initial contact with Mr. Corbell, I kind of did sit back and started researching and listening to other folks talk about it, and there was a lot of what you said, infighting. And then once I saw Mr. Beaty's video, it was just straight to the point, and I said, I'm going to reach out to Mr. Beaty. So yeah, I did see some of that infighting going on, and I was like, wait a minute, when in our history has the DoD ever released videos like this? And people were still not happy with it, and that's surprising.
Yeah. PJ, just a question for you. Did you ever have any interest in this topic before, or did it just all come about because of this situation?
I can't say I've never been interested in it, but I never knew about half this world. I never knew there were conferences. All you ever knew was what they showed on TV.
Yeah,
that's true.
But there's a line in the movie Contact where they say, if we're alone in the universe, it's an awful waste of space.
Yes. Yeah.
And I do firmly believe that. I can't tell you if there's there. I can tell you if there's any of that. But I can't tell you there's not.
Right. Yeah.
And I do believe it's an awful waste of space if we're alone in this universe.
Yeah.
So I've always had a passing interest in the topic. I've just never. It took this to get me involved, so to speak.
Yeah, and that's what it often takes. We have another caller on the line. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
Steve in Oregon.
Oh, hi, Steve in Oregon. How are you?
Hey. Good. How you guys doing?
Do you have a question for anyone in particular?
Well, I've got a couple things I would like to ask about. PJ, I don't understand how Roger can have a security clearance. I mean, have signed an NDA, and somehow he's allowed for you to relay information. I mean, that's a complete disconnect for me.
I'm going to put it two ways.
You said you're speaking for two people.
Yes, Roger is a real person. Roger is...
Who signed an NDA.
Yes, Roger is still active in the government industry. If Roger was not, I can almost guarantee you Roger would be talking about it himself. But he's got a family to be concerned about, so he's got to keep his mouth quiet. What Roger has told me is not, and this is between a conversation I've had with Roger, what Roger has told me is not what he, it's very basic. It's not what he was told not to say. What they were debriefed about has way more to do with than I was flying and something came up next to the airplane. That's a very basic statement that I could have proved without talking to Roger.
Yeah, that just doesn't make sense. As this thing where you say, I know a guy who was there. I know a guy who was a witness who told me everything. So I can tell it to you, secondhand. But supposedly he signed an NDA and he's not allowed to. So I don't.
I mean, it is secondhand. It's been confirmed by a conversation between him and Dave Beaty. So it's not just
that would be a violation. That would be a violation of his NDA.
I can't say you're wrong.
Well, it also depends on what the NDA was about. I mean, perhaps the NDA had nothing to do with the UFO, and it was about some secret technology that he's never mentioned.
Yeah, well, I don't know. One more thing, a couple really quick ones. Dave Beaty, I looked at some of your work, some of your documentaries you did for PBS and some of your other stuff, and it's really good stuff. I was really impressed.
Thank you. I have one coming out this month called D-Day at Pointe du Hoc about the 2nd Rangers' assault on Normandy. So if you see that on PBS.
I saw the one that really interests me was the Nazi attempt to attack New York with a bomb. And when you go to that video, that plane that those two German brothers, the Hochschneider whatever brothers were designing in Germany, looks exactly like the craft in the Phoenix Lights incidents. And I know a lot of those guys came over in the paperclip to Alabama and New Mexico and Arizona. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Walter and Reimer Horton did design some very sophisticated flying wing design craft that I know that you're absolutely right. At the end of World War II, our intelligence apparatus was trying to hunt these guys down because they did want to look at that technology. And if you look at some of the, I guess, the Northrop flying wing designs that came out in the 50s, they're almost facsimile replicas of these German all-wing designs.
Yeah.
So hang on, everyone, for just a sec. We have a new caller. Please mute your listening device. Steve, thanks so much for the call.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So we have a new caller on the line. Your first name, where are you calling from?
This is Adam. I'm calling from Florida.
Oh, is it Adam, did you say?
Abner.
Oh, Abner. Hi. You have a question for any specific guest we have tonight?
Yeah, this is directly mostly for TJ. My question is, during the time, I've been trying to figure out, the Navy has different jobs, and most of these jobs, they have levels of security clearance. I, myself, was a bubblehead, which was an ex-submariner during that time. As a matter of fact, watching this, I realized this was nearby where I was stationed in San Diego. So I'm very surprised about all this. But the thing is that what level of clearance did PJ hold? Because he was an aviation mechanic. So I'm not too sure as to how much knowledge he will be able to be privy to at a certain level at that sort of job.
PJ? PJ?
Sorry, I couldn't unmute. I was trying to unmute myself for a second.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, I had an active top secret clearance at the time. There's more to a security clearance than, confidential, secret, or top secret. There's a bunch of gibberish language that goes along with it. But at a basic, I had a top secret clearance at the time.
Mm-hmm. And what was your rate then?
I was an avionics technician.
An avionics technician. Okay, I can see. Because I know a lot of my radio operators, I knew they were top secret also.
I had a compartment security clearance.
Okay. I got you. All right, that was my question. That's all I wanted to know. Thank you.
All right, Abner. Thanks for the call. Lines are open if anyone else wants to call in. Let's see. So I'm going to ask you this question, Dave, and that is, so supposedly from what PJ just said, that you actually had a conversation with the man who likes to be known as Roger. And do you feel that was that he broke the NDA by speaking about it? I mean, you know what he talked about.
Well, yeah. I mean, he flat out told me that he can't talk about some of the stuff. Mm-hmm. And he said, I can tell you that I was in the airplane and I saw the tic-tac. And pretty much that was all he revealed to me. In fact, I tried to ask him some more questions, and he flat out refused to even talk to me at all. And, even in all this stuff, I mean, all these witnesses that have come forward that may have been involved in classified sensors and so on, I asked him, I said, did anyone, first of all, ever tell you not to talk about this stuff that you've revealed here? And they said, no one ever mentioned it to us that we couldn't talk about this UFO encounter that happened. And I said, in the last few months or the last 6 months since you've come forward, has anyone ever approached you behind the scenes and said, okay, stop talking about this? And they said no. And they also told me, every last one of them, that if anyone official ever did come to them and say, okay, guys, can it? We're not going to talk about this anymore, that they would all go black and go dark on it immediately. So, I mean, I think that they are all patriots. In my conversations with them, they love our country, and they would never do anything to jeopardize any secret information. I think that they're just simply talking about an unknown aircraft that this event that happened. So.
Yeah. Okay. We have another caller. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
Hi, Martin. This is Linda from New York.
Well, Linda, how are you? Is this the Linda?
I'm very good. Yeah, this is the Linda. Yeah.
Linda Zimmerman.
Yes.
Yes. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate Omar and PJ coming forward, and I have a question about the man overboard. Since this object seemed to be closer to him, has he been identified and interviewed?
To my knowledge, ma'am, no, he is not. And as far as the proximity to him and the object, it was quite a distance, but I don't know whether or not he saw it.
That was
okay.
That was something I was wondering too. If the person ever talked about it, or if he actually saw it when he was in the water, because you have the open sky in front of you when you're in the water, and the ship over to one side, and that's it. You can see a vast area.
He was quite a distance too. I mean, that's the farthest man overboard I had seen a guy drift as far away as he did. He must have got caught in the current too, and as well as the aircraft carrier was at a coasting speed. As far as what knots, I couldn't answer that.
Linda, you're still doing your show, I'm assuming?
Yes, thank you very much. I am still doing UFO headquarters, and we're actually doing a special on Pine Bush in a couple of weeks, because the Pine Bush UFO Festival is coming up on May 18th.
Right. So since you're on, I'll let you plug your show, and people can listen to it live, can they? And it's Sunday, right?
It is the second Monday of every month on Hudson River Radio, and you can listen to it on podcast anytime. But yes, I appreciate that. But I would love to see, Martin, you come down for the Pine Bush UFO Festival someday. Maybe you could do a show there.
Yeah, it's something I've actually thought about. We'll be in touch off air. Good to talk to you, Linda.
Thank you very much, and I enjoy the show. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye.
So the line is still open. Let's see. Now, going back to this security clearances. I mean, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. Going back to the NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements, are they all different? Or does anyone know that's in the guests here? I mean, do they actually say you can never at any time, any given day, ever talk about this? Is that kind of what it is?
NDAs are very, very specific documents. They don't leave anything to the imagination. I've signed a tremendous amount of them over the years.
What do you know?
It's not even what you know. And this is one thing Dave was talking before, about, respecting NDAs and respecting that stuff. Dave has been absolutely tremendous in respecting the boundaries that we've set, because quite a bit of this, to explain some of it, you start getting into, tactics and capabilities of certain systems, and that's stuff that, we can't share, and he's respected that. He's taken the information we've given him and worked with it. He's never, ever tried to push the boundaries of what we can say or can't say.
That's good.
I've signed, basically every time I transfer, I've signed an NDA. Every time I left certain stuff, I've signed an NDA. And they're all very detailed on what you cannot say and what you basically, it's about what you can't say, not what you can say. And there's not really any guesswork in those.
Is it perpetuity? In other words, you just can't ever talk about it, ever, ever, ever?
No. If the topic or the gear or the equipment or the subject of the NDA has been declassified by a higher authority, it kind of null and voids the NDA in most cases. There are cases where you can just never talk about it. But like I've signed NDAs for equipment and gear that's gone in the airplane that at one time was held a certain classification level, and 2 years down the line they determine it's no longer, doesn't need to be this kind of classification level, so it gets downgraded, and now that becomes a part of normal conversation because you can now talk about it. So there are cases where they are forever, but there are also plenty of cases where it's not.
Wow. Okay. So, Omar, I'm going to ask you this question in particular. When you saw this object, and you talked to you did mention that you did speak to other people that witnessed it. What was your thought about what you were actually witnessing? Did you think it was a technology? Did you think right away that had to be, something not from this planet, or what was going through your head?
Definitely, it wasn't. The object was nothing I'd ever seen in my 10 years on board aircraft carriers, from jets. Even at supersonic speeds, when jets are moving, you can follow them at a distance when you can still view it with your eyeballs. Mm-hmm. But at this distance, from whatever this object, for the distance from the aircraft carrier, you literally had to move your torso and actually look up to see this thing leave. As far as it being out of this world, it didn't cross my mind at that moment. I wasn't too concerned as far as who was in the cockpit or what was it. I don't know whether it was our technology, but then when you hear reports that there were hundreds of these things, one, I hope that all 100 of those pilots, if they are ours, are 100% patriotic, because if they decide to literally go rogue or defect, they're just going to rule the entire airspace on this planet.
That's one of the things that's always surprised me about UFOs and, say, the Air Force, for instance. Just wondering why they don't take more of an interest in something that has technology that is just so scary that, like you just said, it could easily take over the airspace in the world. So that's always baffled me why, Project Blue Book stopped in 1969, and the Air Force supposedly didn't have any interest in this, and then we come to find out there was a little bit of interest, and there still is probably. So, and it only makes sense. And
that's true. I mean, even the individual next to me. See, after the object had left, I went back into flight deck control, and there was this eerie silence amongst those who had just walked back in with me. And one of the guys tried to break the ice by saying, "What the F was that?" And I kind of turned around to look at him and just kind of laugh. And when I turned around to my right, I looked down, and there's a sailor with his hands folded, and he was in prayer.
Wow.
So my experience from what I saw was totally different for this individual. Mm-hmm. And it bothered him to a point where he had to get into prayer because he did not know what he was witnessing.
Yeah.
And even going back into my work center, my shop, I refer to him as ABF. he was there, and we had a general conversation. What we just see, what was this? And he's like, you don't believe in that stuff, do you? And I'm saying, maybe I do now. I mean, what was that? And he tried to write it off. Oh, that was some Chinese technology. That's Chinese stuff. And I told him, I remember this specifically. I said, if that's China's tech, you can basically write us off as the number one superpower on this planet, because we are done if those things want to just lift a finger on us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. And I don't think that's thought about or talked about enough, from some of the technology that we've seen. I'm going to you now, David, and where do you go from here with this film? I saw on YouTube that it said this film's going to be taken down when you have, 1.5 million views on it. Why would you take it down?
Well, from the very beginning, I always wanted to have the film sort of evolve as the story progresses. And I'm on version 2 now, and that was going back to March. Currently, I'm working on the next iteration, and it's going to expand greatly with the new witnesses that have come forward based on the first 2 versions. And so my plan is to put together this really great new version that goes into PJ's story and goes into Gary's story and Kevin Day and brings them all forward. So they're not just being talked about, but they're actually telling us their story themselves. I mean, I really do like to tell personal stories and let the actual witness describe what they experienced and how they felt. And sometimes, all the little details, when you put them side by side, it just becomes this very powerful story. So what I'm telling people is, go to my website, to the video link, and I'm going to try to keep that updated. So as these videos on YouTube, are kind of updated, they have the latest version. Because some people want to link directly to a YouTube video that may be outdated. So
I see. No, very good. We have another caller on the line. Caller, your first name and where are you calling from?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can. What's your first name? Where are you calling from?
Okay. My name's Joe. I'm calling from Michigan.
Hi, Joe. Welcome to the show. You have a question
Thank
for
you.
any one of our guests in particular, or
Yeah,
general?
I do.
Yeah, okay.
I have a question. If anyone is familiar with the Southern Ontario sighting by the Department of Defense engineer and optical engineer through a Nikon rifle scope for 7 minutes at 400 feet, and all the work that he put into work towards a propulsion system and the drawings of the craft in great detail. It was a MUFON, it happened in 2013. It was a MUFON Encounter of the Year for 2016. They didn't report it immediately. That's why it was in 2016, not 2013. But I wonder if any of you gentlemen are familiar with that. Thank you.
No, sir, I'm not aware of that. I didn't even know what I didn't even know what MUFON was until a week ago.
I think you're
I
going
want to know about it.
Yeah, that sounds
well,
like
you might
Go ahead.
You might want to check into it. The gentleman has been interviewed. In the interview, they cover his face. Him and the other gentleman with him. There's 3 gentlemen. They were bear hunting in southern Ontario in the fall of 2013, way back in the woods.
This isn't the Cisco Grove, is it?
No,
Okay.
it is not.
All right.
The gentleman is a extremely educated man. He's interviewed for about 45 minutes by MUFON. It is on YouTube, and I think it would have to be one of my. I've been following this for 50 years, and this would have to be one of my top 5 encounters. And if you're not aware of it, if you can try to find it on YouTube, the Southern Ontario UFO encounter, or through MUFON. And the gentleman has an engineering company, a big DoD contractor, 22 patents, and he's working like crazy to figure out the propulsion system. I think he's real close to it. And as far as a blockbuster encounter that definitely is. I'm surprised that no one has heard of it.
I think, did this thing look like a dumbbell?
It was like a dog bone, dumbbell or a dog bone.
Yes,
milk
I
bone.
know which one you're talking about now. Yeah, that
okay,
that is as soon as you started talking about his background, I remembered the one you're talking about. Yeah, that's a real interesting. And I was talking to Dave earlier about that sometimes the really unusual ones almost seem like they're even more credible because they're just so bizarre. And this is one of those instances. It's a
well, he even saw an insignia on the side of the craft.
Yeah.
He has all the measurements of the craft. He has everything about the craft laid right out. And as far as visual encounter, I don't think there's ever been one like what these gentlemen saw. In 7 minutes through that Nikon rifle scope, he examined that craft and took notes.
Right.
And it is also the audio. When they saw it, all the audio, they have all the audio from their phones. But the video from the phones, it was interrupted by the interference from the craft being so close, which was like 400 feet. But I just wanted to bring that up to you, gentlemen.
Yeah, it's a good one. Okay, Joe, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for the call. All right. So we only have about 2.5, 3 minutes at the most here. So we have to basically wrap up here, and it's been a real pleasure. Dave, I was just asking you basically where you're going from here. Are you going to do something else in the UFO field, or do you think this is a one-time deal?
Again, the future will tell what happens next. Especially with this project that seems to be kind of ongoing. One thought that I had was looking at the military witnesses as a group, military, police, pilots, that it might be interesting to form some type of foundation or form some type of group that supports them, and as well as maybe filmmaking about the topics and the subject matter of these anomalous reports that they have. So, I'm exploring that, in the future after seeing, the benefits and kind of the support that these vets have given each other, just bringing them together and putting them together, I think has been a very positive effect on them.
Right. So this is getting near the end of the show. I just want to say goodbye and have everyone say just one last thing. PJ, I want to thank you very much for I'm not going to say you're not actually coming forward as a witness, but still that ordeal, the whole ordeal is pretty amazing overall. And I appreciate that you're doing what you're doing.
No problem.
Yeah. And the last but not least, Omar, thank you as well. I appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you for having me on the show. It was my pleasure.
And are you going to be speaking, either one of you guys going to be speaking at, I know Kevin Day has spoken at a couple of conferences. Or either one of you been asked to speak anywhere?
No, I have not.
Yeah.
I spoke with Dave, Gary, Jason Turner, and Kevin Day at UFO MegaCon. That's the only one that I've been asked to do, and probably the only one I might do. I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. All right, everyone. Well, I'm going to ask you guys, because it's real difficult for me to do on this side. You're all going to have to hang up on Skype. And I want to thank you so much, and really appreciate it. And again, I want to thank you all for coming forward. And also, Dave, I want to thank you as well.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, everyone. Have a good night.
You too.
We'll see you soon.
All right. Yeah, see you soon, possibly. Very possibly. All right. All right, everyone. So that is it for our show. Thank you so much for listening. Next week, we'll be back with Paul Carr. And I also want to thank the people that help out in the background, and Peggy for managing the Facebook page and all that. And that's it for tonight. And remember, everyone, to keep your eyes to the sky.